We're talking today with Al Kraker of Rockford, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay. Now, Al, can you start with some background on yourself? To begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born in Allendale on June 26, 1924.
Okay. That's Allendale, Michigan.
Right.
Right, okay. And did you grow up there, or did you move around?
I grew up there until I went into the Army. I'd not been over 50 miles away from where I was born.
Okay. And what did your family do for a living?
We were farmers.
Okay. And did you own your farm, or did you rent land?
We owned the farm.
Okay. And was your family able to keep the farm through the 30s?
No, they actually, my dad lost the farm, and we wound up with just a small area, and then I began working for other farmers.
Mm-hmm.
I worked for farmers on weekends and throughout the summer.
Okay. Now, did you work a lot? Did you just do heavy labor? Did you work with machinery, or what did you do?
Both.
Okay.
I worked a couple of years where we were just weeding celery and onions.
Mm-hmm.
You're on your all fours, and that was 10 cents an hour. And one year they were developing a swamp area into another muck farm.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of wood had to be taken off in there. And I spent about 3 months driving a Caterpillar tractor, pulling out trees.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you learn to repair machinery, or work on it, or just operate it?
I just operated that one, where I learned to repair machinery. I had to walk about 3/4 of a mile to school, and in between home and school was a garage, car repair
Mm-hmm.
place. I was fascinated with that, and I was frequently late home for supper, and which Mother didn't appreciate. And I spent a lot of time there watching what they were doing and asking questions. Now, why did you do this? Why did you do that? And that sort of stuck with me.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, do you remember hearing about Pearl Harbor?
Pardon me?
How did you hear about Pearl Harbor?
Pearl Harbor? I really don't know where I was when I heard about that. I don't recall.
Now, did you have a radio in your home?
I think we had a radio, but we rarely used it.
Okay.
Yeah. I was about 14 years old, I think, before we got electricity in our
Mm-hmm.
house. So I stayed with the mechanic activity, and I had an aptitude for, when we finally got electricity in the house, Mother had a problem with burners in the electric stove. It didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And, her iron, she was ironing clothes, and that didn't work. So they didn't think much about the advantages of electricity. But then I began taking these things apart and find out how they were made and
Mm-hmm.
what they did, and then I was repairing them. So from there on, that stayed with me too. I used that aptitude in the Army.
Right.
And when I got home, I wired houses for neighbors.
All right. To go back, okay, so you're doing this kind of thing, you know, and you, as a teenager now, and you finished high school?
Yes,
Okay. And when did you graduate from high school?
in 42.
Okay. And what did you do after you graduated from high school?
I first went to Keeler Brass and worked on the screw machine, and didn't care for that. I then left and I worked for a boat company in Holland. They were building landing boats for troops.
Mm-hmm.
They were 36 footers, they had diesel engines, and I worked there for about 4 months. And then the order was completed. They did not, the Army did not issue another order. So I began looking around, and I finally wound up with two of my friends and I, the three, they called us the Three Musketeers. We went to Muskegon and were interviewed. I got a job, the other two did not. So I had to go back in and say thanks, but no thanks, because we're on gas rationing,
Mm-hmm.
and there was no way I could get there. So then we went to Grand Rapids and went to a new company that only had about 20 people called Rapid Standard.
Mm-hmm.
It was a conveyor company. And again, I was hired, the other two were not. So I went back in and said, thanks, but no thanks. And what really surprised me, I was talking with the man that founded the company.
Mm-hmm.
He said, bring the other guys back in. So he hired all three of us. And then some years later, when I got out of the Army, I went back there and spent 44 years total there.
Wow. All right. Now, somewhere along the line, though, you got a draft notice. Did you get a draft notice at some point?
Oh, yes.
And when did that happen?
I think that was in December of 42.
Okay.
And my two buddies, we all got them at the same time. And they were called up before I was.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really get called up until in February, and then they gave me a March date that I'd be
Mm-hmm.
going in.
Okay. And where did they send you for basic training?
They sent me to Signal School in Missouri. So,
And
close to Joplin,
Right.
Missouri.
and what base was that? Camp Crowder?
Camp Crowder, yes. That was quite an experience, because they looked at my record and they said, oh, this guy ought to be in the mechanic school. So
Mhm.
they put me in the automotive mechanics school. The instructor was a very young guy who didn't know anything about mechanics, and he was trying to teach it out of a book. So there's a young fellow from Detroit who had about the same aptitude I did. He was sitting next to me and he says, this is terrible. So we gave the instructor a bad time, and he got us out of the class. They said, if you guys are capable mechanics, we need mechanics in the truck repair area right now.
Mm-hmm.
So what we'd like you to do, the school would be 3 months. What we'd like you to do is work on repairing trucks for 3 months, and when the rest of the guys get through, you get in line for graduation.
Mm-hmm.
and that's what we did.
All right. So did you enjoy that job while you had it?
Oh yeah, that was fun. Yeah. When we got through, I decided I'd really like to be an airplane pilot. So I signed up for that, took a lot of tests and the whole bit. And the company commander, the training company commander was an elderly man. He was real old, like 45 years
Right.
old. And he said to me, how old are you? And I said, I'm 18. He said, I think you really ought to wait a couple of years. So that ended that thing.
All right. Now, while you were at Camp Crowder, I mean, could you go into town, into Joplin, and do stuff, or did you just stay on the base?
We could get a pass about every 2 weeks. You could get a half-day pass, and there were buses running back and forth all the time because there were a lot of trainees at Camp Crowder. It was a pretty town. They have a stream, river running through the town, and parks along the way. Yep.
Now, did they have movie theaters or bars, or where did guys go?
We didn't bother with that.
Okay. All right. Well, some guys might have, just not you. Okay. So you're there for 3 months, so you get to graduate with the unit, and then what do they do with you after that?
They told me that I was going to, after the turn down on the Air Force, I applied for officers training. And they told me I was going to be picked up at a certain time. And I was out waiting along the train track. The train was going to stop about 1 o'clock in the morning. And I and a couple of other people were to get on that train. And the train never came. So we walked back to the camp, and they said, well, now we don't know exactly what's going to be next, so just sit tight for a few days and we'll get this ironed out. So 3 days later, I got another notice to go down to the train station, and got on the train. I didn't know where we were going, but we went to New York and got aboard ship and went to North Africa.
All right. Now, what kind of ship were you on?
It was a USS Monticello. It was a Italian cruise ship that was captured in South America and converted to a troop ship. We had far too many people on it. We had 7,000 people. And the area I was in was 2 decks below water, and there's no steps or anything, just a ladder to climb up. The bathrooms were 2 stories above us, and what happened, it was so hot where we were. The area we were in didn't have regular cots. It was a pipe framework with a canvas, and they were 4 high and 5 deep. So the aisles were pretty small. Not many people could be out standing up at one time. We were fed at 4 o'clock in the morning. We got 1 ice cream dipper full of cold oatmeal and an apple. And then at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we got the same thing in. and that's all
Did you get to go up on deck at least? And
we got once a day we could go up on deck and march around. They had Marines there with armed excuse me, armed Marines to lead us around, because so many of the people that were in the area that I was in would do anything to not go back down there. So we would march around on the ship, and we'd see guys up there covered up with blankets, and they were complaining about being cold.
now, what time of year was this?
This was in July.
Okay, so middle of the year, the summer.
Yeah.
Okay. Now the ocean is probably cold, and if you're on deck the whole time, you might get cold.
Yeah.
But you guys didn't worry about that. Okay. Now, did the ship sail by itself, or were you in a convoy?
We was in a convoy of probably 200 ships, and we were in the center of all this, and there were several smaller ships around us that were circling, looking for subs.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't encounter any subs. We had fuel tankers, and they go very slow because they're loaded almost level with water, and so the entire fleet had to go at slow speed.
Mm-hmm. And did you also zigzag as you went? Did you change course a lot?
No, we didn't change
Okay.
course. We had a problem with our propulsion system. Steam boiler blew up and killed a couple of sailors, and we lost all power, and the rest of the fleet got going. And when we got out on our morning tour on the top deck, we looked around and there's nobody there. We're all alone.
Wow.
And but the next morning, when we got up, we were back in the middle again.
Okay. Had they gotten the engines going again? Or
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And now, do you remember going through the Straits of Gibraltar?
Yes.
Okay. And could you see that when you went through, or were you down below?
We did not see it when we went through, but we came up where we could view it from behind us.
Okay.
When we went through it.
All right. And then where did you land?
In Oran, which is, I think it's part of Algeria.
Algeria, yes.
It's a beautiful natural ship basin.
Mm-hmm.
One of my friends here was older than I, and he went there, landed at the same place about 6 months before I was there, and their ship was torpedoed, and it was tied up at the dock in this place.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, when you got there, so now this is the summer of '43, so by now the fighting has moved on to Sicily, and North Africa is a secure area. What did you do then once you got off the ship?
I was on, well, ironically, the first week we were there, when they were trying to sort out who goes where and who does what, I started getting a fever, and I went on sick call, and they decided that I had what they normally get in the Philippine Islands.
Okay. Malaria?
I had malaria.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent the first 2 weeks there in a hospital, and I went back to join the company, and there was repair section that worked on generators. And I assumed they were talking about a generator from a truck or a tank or something like that. Anyway, he came to me and he said, can you repair a generator? I think so, yeah. Well, there's one outside here. He said, go get it and bring it in and go to work on it. So I went out and I looked around. I could not find a generator. So I came back in and I said, what happened? I said, it's not there. Oh, he said, you must be blind. He said, come on now. So he took me outside. We walked over to a trailer that had a big tarp over it. Peeled the tarp back, and here's a generator that big. I said, oh. I've never worked on one of those. I've never seen one before. And all he said to me was, the principle is the same. Repair it. He says, we're running short of equipment. So I repaired it. Those generators of that size were driven by Jeep engines, 4-cylinder gas engines. So.
And what were they used for? Was that just for power on a base, or?
There's a lot of them power on the base, depending on the size of the bases, and some of them were used for anti-aircraft searchlights.
Okay. Now, was this company the one that you would join, or was this just a temporary stop for you?
Well, this was this is where I was assigned.
Okay. And what was that unit?
591 Signal Depot Company.
Okay. All right. And at that time, were they attached to a particular division, or were they just an independent unit that supported the larger army?
It was the remnant of the Signal Company of the 34th Division.
Okay.
That, lost about 50% of their personnel in Kasserine Pass. And so there was a group of all of us young guys went in there as replacements.
And what kind of reception did you get when you new guys showed up?
Not very good. The old timers really didn't care for us being there. They thought it was the sergeant says wars should be fought by soldiers, not by kids. And when he came by me, I said, Sergeant, I agree with you. You can send me back on the next ship. And that made me a marked man. I learned that when you're at attention in ranks, you don't move, you don't say anything, you're just rigid. So,
Now, had your experience back at Camp Crowder been a lot more casual?
yes.
Yeah. Okay. So you really weren't used to, and you didn't really get the full spit and polish basic training.
No.
No, you were just doing your own thing. Okay. So this really is kind of new to you at the time. All right. So you get up on the wrong foot with the company sergeant, and basically, how long were you with that unit, and what were you doing?
It's about a year, and because I was the only power equipment person they had, I spent months working 18-hour days, 7 days a week. The company commander would not permit anybody with any grease spots on their fatigues. If you had a grease spot on your fatigue, you could not get in the mess hall. So we had an abundance of 100 octane gas. So at the end of the time period when it's time to go to chow, you take your fatigues off, wash them out in 100 octane gas, hang them up by a fan, and within about 5 minutes you can put them on, and you got dry clean clothes.
Okay. Now, did that retain an odor from the gas? I mean, did you smell like gas?
No, it was never a problem.
Okay. All right. And now, did you work pretty much by yourself, or did you have guys in the shop with you, or how did that go?
Pretty much myself. We had about 300 Italian prisoners there, and they were just in a fenced-in area, nothing to do,
Mm-hmm.
nothing, didn't know what to do with them. And so they came to me and said, we're going to give you 6 prisoners, and they can start dismantling engines and stuff like that, and that'll save you some time. It turns out all of the people we had there were farmers and had never seen an engine before. So they would take things apart and they would pile parts all on, get everything mixed up.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, whoa, I can't handle that.
Now, did any of them speak any English?
No, they didn't speak English.
And did you have anybody who spoke any Italian?
No.
Okay.
So yeah, that was a problem. Another guy, one of the Italian prisoners wanted to work in the wood shop where they were making crates for shipping stuff. And the first day he was there, they had to wear gloves. He pushes a board through the saw and cuts the thumb off. The thumb stayed in the glove. I never will forget that.
Okay. Now, the 34th Division itself takes part in the landings in Italy in September of '43, and that's not much after you get there. They go ahead, but you stay behind in Africa.
Right.
Okay. And that, so, since the war wasn't really happening in Africa anymore, where did you get the equipment from to work on?
An airplane came in every day, just before dark, loaded with beat-up equipment, and he would take off in the morning and go back with whatever had been repaired. It was difficult to keep up, and so many of the Americans were not familiar with engines either.
Mm-hmm.
I would get a 10 horsepower Briggs & Stratton generator engine, and I'd look to see if there's any oil in it. Yeah, it's new oil.
Mm-hmm.
It just changed oil in it. So how could that happen? Why isn't it running? It turns out they ran it without oil, ruined the rod and the crankshaft, and they didn't want to admit that, so they filled it with fresh oil and then shipped it over to Africa.
All right.
They had a lot of those.
Okay. So, and now, what kind of living conditions did you have there? Where were you staying?
We were staying in tents just outside of the city of Oran,
Mm-hmm.
a couple miles out of the city. And yeah, there were several different, I was in 591, there were probably 6 or 7 more companies in the same area.
Yeah, that all had specialized jobs. Yeah.
They all had specialists. Some of them were people that set poles and put up wire for communications. Some were strictly radio. I remember one guy, there was a Jeep accident and it demolished the Jeep. He took the radio out of that and did some work on it and built a little box and wound up with a portable radio. And we would walk around town and there would be 50 kids following us, you know, something they'd never heard.
Okay, so you got, at least sometimes you got a little bit of time off and you could
Right.
go into town and that sort of thing. Yeah, what was the relationship like between the American servicemen and the local people in the area?
It was not good, and the main reason was because of the American soldiers. A lot of the young soldiers said, well, you know, they can't do anything to us. I witnessed a guy selling a mattress cover. You could put straw on it and make a mattress. That was a prime outfit for the Arabs, and sold it to them, and then yanked it away from them, and away they went. And I said, this is really not the way you make friends. But there was too much of that. They were the Americans were not very nice people.
Were there problems with any of the Arabs trying to steal things from the American bases or depots or things, or?
Yeah, we had a problem with that. We had guards walking around our area. There was a fence around the area, but there were occasionally we'd get a rain and have to drain it out. So there were little excavations under the fence. They'd come in through there, creep into there, and I know the tent right next to the tent that I was in, they would come in overnight and slice the tent and pull out the barracks bags, and away they would go.
All right. Now, as time goes on, I mean, you had a very difficult schedule, but you also didn't get along very well with the leadership in your company.
That's right. Yeah, I would normally get to bed about 1 o'clock in the morning, and when the company commander was upset about something, you never really knew what it was. 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, get everybody out on their hands and knees, pick up cigarette butts by moonlight. This happened over and over. It got so bad that three guys in my outfit committed suicide. I said, well, how can they commit suicide there? Because they took all our guns away from us. And what they did is there was a big pile of telephone poles that the signal people were using. So they'd take the top pole and move it out and hang themselves.
It was just because life was just being made that hard for them for that long, and there was no prospect of going anyplace else.
No, you can't tell anybody about it. That went on until Claire Booth Luce was a representative, I think, in Washington, D.C. She went over there and came to our area and said she wanted to talk to some of the GIs. So the company commander said, okay, come on. And she said, no, I want to just talk with GIs.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need you. Well, a lot of GIs unloaded on her. She came back and it didn't take long and things really changed. But by that time I was fed up. I was on my way out. I went to Algeria to General Hospital for a separate shakedown physical, because you had to have you had to be able to do anything possible in the paratroops.
Okay,
But-
so I guess you had applied, you basically were trying to get out of your unit, so you
Yeah.
applied to become a paratrooper?
Right.
Okay. Now what else was the company commander, I mean, so far you've sort of presented him as somebody who follows the rules too much, but what else was he up to?
We had just two mobile communication units. They were loaded with radio gear and telephone stuff.
Mhm.
Rather expensive units. And he stripped all the gear out of one of them and put a mattress in it and went around town picking up girls.
And then once he had the girls, was he renting them out, or,
Pardon?
I mean, what did he do? What happened then? I mean, the girls get in the, was that for his entertainment or someone else's?
After Claire Booth Luce was there, that ended.
Mhm. But I guess I think you need to explain a little bit better for an outside audience what was going on. I mean, was this just his own private vehicle for his own entertainment?
Yes.
Okay, so he wasn't renting the girls out to anybody else?
No.
Okay, it was just his thing.
Just his.
Okay, and that stuff. But in the meantime, you had already put in an application to join the Airborne.
Right.
Okay, and now what happens to you?
I went for this physical. It's an all-day thing, and I passed everything except the last part of the physical was checking your eyesight.
Mm-hmm.
And what I did not know was you have to have 20/20 vision in both eyes to be a paratrooper. I had 20/20 in my left eye, but all my life I had about 20/80 or 90 in my right eye. So I'm in this long, narrow optical place, and the guy said, "You got a problem with your right eye, haven't you?" Yeah. Why? What difference does that make? Well, he said, you got to have 20/20 in both eyes to be a paratrooper. I said, I really didn't know that. I said, I don't know what I'm going to do now. And after a little hesitation, he said, "Are you from Michigan?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he's standing behind me. And he said, "Are you from the Grand Rapids area?" I said, "Yes, I am." And then he turned the light on. And it was my buddy from high school. And he says, "You really want to get into paratroops, huh?" I said, I have to get out of where I am. And this is the only way out. He says, "Okay, 20/20 both eyes. Now, if it gets too tough for you, you can't take it. Complain about your vision." And he said, "They'll kick you out."
Mm-hmm.
I said, "No, I'm not going to complain."
All right. So what's your next step? You got through the physical, you qualify, now what do you do?
We went to Italy, the southern part of Italy, for paratroop training. The first day, we had to double time, which is jogging, actually. We had to double time 5 miles without stopping. And thought, wow, you know, by that time you have muscles you didn't know you had. The second day, it was 10 miles. The third day, it was 20 miles, and every day after that, it was 20 miles.
Now, did some of the guys drop out along the way?
Several of them did. We started out with about 600, 650 people. And if somebody dropped out, if they fainted, actually fainted, we called it the meat wagon. The ambulance would come behind us. And if it were somebody in one of near the front, everybody just stepped over them and kept going. The ambulance would get to him and check him out.
Mm-hmm.
And if he were unconscious, he was still in, and he could try again the next day. But if he were conscious, that meant that he gave up. And one thing paratroops can never take is a quitter.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be a quitter. You can't give up ever. So if they were conscious, the next day they were on their way to the infantry.
Right. All right. So you did you get other training besides just the running?
Oh yeah, we got training on using different types of rifles and guns and bazookas and yeah. So when we went for our first jump, we're on our way to the airport, and we see a plane in the air and says, "Oh, that's a British plane." They had a training area only about 15 miles from where we were. And sure enough, guys started peeling out, boom, 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 boom. They try to get 12 people out in 10 seconds. And otherwise they scattered too far. And one of them, his chute did not open, and he landed about 30 feet from the road where we were. We're on our way for our first jump. So that was a different experience.
Mm-hmm.
But on my fourth jump, I had a 45-pound machine gun strapped to my chest. And that machine gun of that size will jump all over the place. When you're firing it requires a heavy base plate. So another guy had the base plate, but I had the gun. And it was a windy day, and I did not land well. So I wound up with crushed vertebrae, and I spent quite a bit of time in the hospital.
You wound up with what?
Crushed
Vertebrae. Oh, yeah. Okay.
So then I went to a replacement camp.
Well, how long did you spend in the hospital?
Oh, that one I think I was probably 4 weeks.
Okay.
And then I went to a replacement camp where you're made available for assignment, and where there's a lot of people in the camp. And that camp was really different. We had to go out every day. We'd go on a 5-mile march and loaded down with all kinds of ammunition, and we'd dig a foxhole and set up mortars and bomb the top of a mountain. And about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, take everything down, fill in the foxhole, and go back to camp.
Okay.
Now, this is, you can't get more idiotic than that. What a waste. It didn't occur to me until after I left that camp, actually. They had 7,000 guys there. And when you got 7,000 guys with nothing for them to do, they're going to do something that's not going to be good.
Mm-hmm.
So they had to keep everybody occupied. And that's how they did.
Okay. Now, how long did you stay in that camp?
I was in that camp, I think, probably 4 weeks.
Okay. And what do you do next?
And next, I went to, I got assigned to the 10th Mountain Division, and we did some more training with that outfit. And the 10th Mountain Division was going to go up to the northern part of Italy for the last big battle.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't feeling good. They gave us a date when we were going to leave, and I went on sick call because I was having a lot of pain in my side. It turns out I have appendicitis.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this was in the fall, rainy. The area is all clay. The operating room was a cot, and the doctors and nurses were walking around in clay 2 inches thick, at least, just mud. And I was there about a week, and the outfit moved up to the 10th Mountain Division.
Mm-hmm.
So they moved the hospital with it. So the doctors in the service did not have rules and regulations of how they should treat a patient. They treated them as they did in their own practice before they were drafted. And I had an older gentleman, and I was supposed to spend 7 days before I could sit on the edge of the cot and dangle my feet.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I went to, this was the 6th day, I think, when they went up. So they had about 15 or 20 ambulances. You could put 8 guys in, 4 guys in an ambulance, 2 in the bottom and 2 were suspended in straps, and brought us back to Naples, to a general hospital there. And they just unloaded us, lined us all up on the sidewalk, and we thought, what's going to happen? Nothing's happening. Finally, about an hour later, some guys came around and started picking us up and bringing us in, putting us in beds. So about 5 o'clock, something like that, it was the first time I saw a nurse. I called her over and I said, how do I get something to eat? I said, I haven't had anything to eat all day, haven't had anything to drink, but she said, well, that's strange. She looked at the card on the end of my bed and she says, oh, there's a mistake here. She said, it says on here that you had your surgery 6 days ago. I said, I did. Well, she said, that's factual? I said, yeah. She said, if you want something to eat around here, you would get up and get it. I couldn't even stand up.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the guys in another bed that was ambient went to the mess hall and got me something to eat.
Now, did you eventually get up and start walking, or what happens?
Yeah, well, I got up then and walked around hanging onto the bed, and the next day I was able to get around.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got out of there, I went back to another replacement camp, a different one.
Mm-hmm.
And, oh, when I finally did get into that general hospital, 2 days later, some of the guys that I trained with in the paratroops were brought back from Germany. They had dropped them in I lost track of the name of the place. Anyway, they were pretty well shot up. I think God was really looking out for me.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't jump into that thing. They were really beat up.
All right, so we were kind of following your story. You'd gone into another replacement depot and waiting for something to happen again.
Now then, I was waiting for that. The 10th Mountain Division had their last real fight there, and the Germans gave up. And I thought, well, now I'm going home. And so all the many different military companies would fill out what they call their TO. If they had 120 people in that company and they were down to 80, they would want to fill that up to 120. They'd get them out of the, and then go home.
Right.
So I'm waiting for that to happen. Every morning, you go out and look at the bulletin board, see if your name is up there. If it's not up there, we would go out and get bomb away, blast away with rockets and stuff. And that kept us busy. But finally my name did show up. And the sergeant took me to the train station, and I was the only one on that list. So the ranking officer gets the paperwork, so I had my own paperwork.
Mm-hmm.
So I got on one end of the train and walked off the other end of the train and got over to a different part of the rail station, a freighter, and I jumped a freighter and was headed south.
Okay, now, why did you do that?
I was trying to get to, I went to Ciampino Airport, the Rome airport, and I couldn't get a ride. I wanted to go see my brother, who was with Patton's 3rd Armored Division in Germany. And but the Alps were between us, and you can't walk
All right.
across the
Now,
Alps.
you didn't have permission to do that, though.
No, I didn't.
What were your orders for? Where were you supposed to go?
I was supposed to go to the 591 Signal Depot, the same place that I was with, same people I was with in Africa when I came over.
Right, and the one you wanted to get out of. Now, before we started the interview, you told me that you had done something else in between times. You had sent a communication to your former company commander at some point when you were in the hospital.
Oh, yes.
Can you tell that story?
That's when I was in the hospital for getting racked up in the paratroops.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote him a letter and told him exactly what I thought of him. But in the Army, letters cannot be mailed until they are censored. They have to be censored by an officer, any officer. So I wrote this letter and gave it to my nurse and said, will you mail this for me? She says, well, I've got to read it. She said, I have to censor it. I said, I really don't think you want to read this one. Why don't you just be nice today and just sign it and mail it? She said, okay. So she did that.
All right. And that company commander was still commander of the company at this point.
They moved to Italy later.
Yeah. Okay. So you had orders to go there. You didn't want to go there, so you decided to go find your brother instead.
I was going to go find my brother.
All right.
I hadn't seen him in 4 years. He was in England for a while, for close to a year, I think,
Mm-hmm.
before the invasion of Europe. And he was in on that. So I tried to get on an airplane, and I had the wrong uniform. They change uniforms summer and winter, and they changed uniforms 2 days before I got out of the hospital, or out of the replacement camp.
Mm-hmm.
So I stood out very clearly that I was different, and you'd be surprised how many military police there are. I spent some time at Ciampino Airport and was unsuccessful. Then I went to, jumped another train that night and went to Naples.
Well, didn't you get on one airplane that you thought was going to Germany?
I went to Naples, and there I got on an airplane, and I was told from people at the airport that that plane was going to Germany. So I got on and there was luggage and stuff on that plane and covered with a tarp. So I got under the tarp and waited for him to take off, and finally the plane started up and they were taxiing around by the airport station and getting ready for takeoff, and the co-pilot comes back to check the loading, make sure everything is secure. And I must have moved or something. He saw a movement in the tarp, so he came back there, discovered me, and he said, what are you doing here? I said, I just want to get across the Alps, so I'm going to go see my brother. And he said, well, that's going to take a long time because we're heading for Burma. Burma. I have no desire to go there. So I got off and walked back to the building, and the plane took off. So I finally wound up going to Caserta. Caserta is about 30 miles north of Naples, and that was Allied Force headquarters. All the generals, the American, English,
Mm-hmm.
Russian, all of the generals were in that one building, huge building. So I thought, that's the best place to turn in. So I turned in there and said I was lost, and I got these traveling orders. So I was accepted. They believed me. And I spent a whole day in the colonel's office. He called the company that I had to go to. They said they would send a Jeep over to pick me up, and I knew where they were. But I was really fatigued at that time. I hadn't had sleep for a long time. So, and he had an overstuffed chair there that he said, sit down and I'll call him. Well, I sat down and went sound asleep. And about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, he came back and really got upset with me being in his office because I'm a corporal.
Mm-hmm.
And then he took another look and he said, are you the guy that was here this morning? And I said, yes. They didn't pick you up? No. So he got on the phone and got a hold of the first sergeant. And it didn't take long. There was a Jeep there to pick me up.
Okay, now this tape is about up, so we're going to stop here. All right, now in your story, we've gotten to the point where the European war is basically over. You're down in Italy. You found that you had been reassigned to your former unit, and you were just about to be sent back to them. Now, you mentioned briefly that you knew where they were. Now, you had already been to visit that unit once during this journey. So
Yes.
Can you fill in that piece of the story?
Yes, I knew where they were because when I was over the hill, I was getting hungry, and then I couldn't find anything to eat anywhere, didn't have any money, and so I hitchhiked one night and found their camp, and now the question is, how are you going to get any food out of there at 2 o'clock in the morning? All positions in the Army, all companies tents were in rows, and the first tent always had the first 3 graders, they call them. They were top sergeants. The second tent had some sergeants also, but always the cook was in the second tent. So I had a flashlight with me, and I went to the second tent, and I was looking for my buddy Rizzle, was the cook in Africa, and sure enough, I found his cot. There's 8 people in a tent. So now I'm going to create quite a problem here to wake up all these people. So I put my hand over his mouth. He was sleeping, and put the flashlight on me, and then woke him up, and he recognized me right away. Hadn't seen him in quite a while. He said, what are you doing here? I said, I'm hungry, I need some food. He said, oh, okay. So he gets up, we go to the mess hall, he puts together a bag of food, and I went back out and hitchhiked back to the Caserta area, and tried to, well, actually, I really went back to Naples again.
Mm-hmm.
Caserta didn't have that good an airport. So, but that's when I got on a plane and.
Right, yeah, and you eventually you wound up in Caserta, you turned yourself in, they're sending you back to your unit now.
So then I turned myself in and went back. And I expected to be really dressed down by the company commander, because I was really not kind to him when I wrote him that letter. And I anticipated being raked over the coals pretty good. But he didn't come into the mess hall when I was having a chow with the rest of the guys. And the next day, the same thing, didn't see him. And the third day, at breakfast, somebody tapped me on the shoulder, and I turned, here's my old company commander. He said, when you get through eating, come to my office. I said, well, it has to come, so here it is. So I went to his office, and he said to me, you don't want to be here, do you? I said, no, I don't. He said, I don't want you here either, but I don't have a choice, because the company is assured that they're going home, but he said, they are not going home, they don't know it yet. So he said, I'm telling you, because the reason you're here, to fill out my TO, I had to have 2 power equipment repairmen to go to the Philippine Islands. And he said, we've searched for about a month to find out where you were, and finally located you. So he said, we now have the 2, and they're going to have an infantry first lieutenant come in and go through some training exercises. And he said, that's going to go on for about a week, and then we'll be loading up and heading out. So he said, tomorrow morning, the lieutenant from the infantry will be here, and you will fall out with the rest of the guys. So I did, and one of the things he was trying to show the guys how to use. Now, I first objected. I said, I've had all kinds of training.
Mm-hmm.
I've had paratrooper training, and then when they were getting ready to send me to the 10th Mountain Division, I had more training. He said, just go on out there. So I went to him and I said, I'm not going back out. I said, this lieutenant's going to kill himself or some of the guys. I said, I saw him trying to teach one of your guys how to hold a bazooka. Where was he standing? It was a loaded bazooka. He was standing right in back of it.
And what happens when a bazooka fires?
Oh, you get a shot of fire about 20 feet back.
Yeah, there's a back blast that comes out behind it because it's just a big hollow tube.
Yeah. And he was standing right back. If the guy would have pulled the trigger, he'd have killed the lieutenant behind him. So I said, I don't think that lieutenant should be here, and I'm certainly not going to be involved in it. He said, okay, you can stay here. So, but we left. He had to tell people then that they were not going home, and some of them were old timers from Texas. They'd been in there, been away. They hadn't been home for 5 years, and they were really on a downer. But anyway, we went to through the Panama Canal, and we were on an APA, which is an assault personnel. ship, which is rather fast. It'll go about 26 knots. And because it was capable of that speed, we went across the Pacific Ocean without any destroyers to go with us. So we did a lot of zigzag. But we were jammed full. We had so many guys that it was difficult to find a place to sit on the dock. You know, I had to stand because there were so many people. And one night in the mess hall, I recognized one of the guys from our company was tending to the kitchen. So I saw him later. I said, "What are you doing?" Oh, he said, "I got tired of sitting out there." So he said, I explained to him that I was a cook for many years, and if they needed somebody to supervise, I'd be happy to do it. So they said, "Okay, fine." So he said, "Every once in a while, they'll put something out and I'll throw it away." I tell them that wasn't any good. Oh, they appreciated that. And I was telling them about what I was doing. He said, "Why don't you volunteer for the crew?" He said, I'll get you a job." So the next day I get called and they said, "We'd like to put you on the garbage detail up on the poop deck in the back. That's the upper deck in the back." So I said, "Oh, that's fine. Up there you got all kinds of room." And there's a big incinerator. The incinerator's about as big as a kitchen. And has force feed fans, but they didn't burn anything. So that's where you could sleep. And downstairs in the ship, it was really miserably hot. So what we had to do is tin cans, you had to chop the bottom of the can to make sure that it would sink. Wood, we'd tie it in bundles from wood crates and stuff. And paper, we'd have to put some weights on it and tie them in bundles. And nothing, you had all day to sort this stuff as it came up from the mess hall. And just before dark, we kicked it overboard. And that was okay. That kept us busy. But 2 days later, I was sorting out the paper bags that came from the bakery, and there was a frying pan in there. Wow. So I set the frying pan aside. We took care of the rest of it, I and another guy. The next day, there was a dozen eggs. Oh, we're going to have eggs. And a loaf of bread. So we made a little fire in the... we didn't have any eggs in a long, long time. And then one night, wasn't night, it was about 4 o'clock. Here comes a GI with a crate of oranges on his shoulder coming up the steps. He was having a very difficult time. So I said, "What do you got?" And he said, "I got a whole crate of rotten oranges." Okay, so I helped him set it down. I opened up the crate. There was no rotten orange in it. So that made it a little easier going on that trip.
right. And did you stop anywhere before you got to the Philippines? Or would you just go straight across?
We went to Hollandia, New Guinea
Mhm.
to refuel, and then went back up to the Philippines.
Okay. And where in the Philippines did you land?
At Manila, Leyte.
Well, Leyte is in the middle of
Yeah.
the island. Manila is on Luzon, the northern island. So, it's a
Manila's on the main island.
yeah.
Yeah. That's where we went. We
Mhm.
set up a tent and waited a couple of days for another ship to take us to Cebu. And we set up our camp in Cebu. At that time, the atomic bomb had been dropped, and the war had ended. But it took a while. There were so many GIs in the area. It took a while to sort everything out
Mhm.
and try to get them back. But I was unfortunate. I got maybe dysentery once all down, and they flew me over to Leyte. There was a general hospital.
Mhm.
And spent it was a 10-day treatment, imitine shots, and I walked into this big ward, and there's guys all over there. They're all laying in bed. What's going on here? I said, you'll find out. I said, you won't be able to sit. They're all laying on their stomach. And I said, oh, well, okay. So I said, I want to take them all in my arm. I got 8 of them in my left arm, and it was swollen, very, very sore. So the other 2 went in my right arm, and that's all it took. I couldn't use either arm. They had to feed me. and it took a while for all the swelling to go down.
Mhm.
So I forget just how long I was in the hospital, but it was at least a week or so after the end of the treatments
Mhm.
before I could go. And I went back to my company, and they told me not to do any work for a month, and I had to have another physical at the end of the month. I did that. I went to the station hospital.
So how did you spend your time during that month?
I was just roaming around, going into the city, and irritating the first sergeant. He had things he wanted me to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so
I went back to the station hospital, and they said, you still got the bug. And when I went in, talk about the bowel movements, I was having a bowel movement at least 1 an hour. And I was in worse condition than I realized I was.
Mhm.
The people there kept asking me for my mother's name and address. So they wanted to know who to notify. Anyway, I went back and went through this whole thing again. And then because of the heat and everything, I got a lot of blisters, and the head surgeon for the whole area came through the hospital one day, and he was checking out everybody. making decisions on what to do with patients. And he came to my bed and he said to the attendant, "The only thing you can do for this guy is give him a cooler climate," which sounded real good. I want to get out of here. So, yeah, I didn't go back to my company. And shipped out of Leyte on the hospital ship. About the third day out, we ran into a typhoon. And we lost power on the ship. I just met a guy we were out on deck, on the back deck. Met a guy that I went to high school with. And he was in the Red Arrow Division down there. And we could see the front of the ship would go down under the waves, and it would come up, and we lost all our weight. We were just, so I think maybe we should get off and get inside. So we did, and it was time to eat, so we went to mess hall. And there, you eat standing up. The table is about 18 inches wide. It's got pipes up to the top and the bottom, and then they're adjustable on these pipes. And I just gotten through eating, grabbed the first rail of the step to go up to the next deck, when they lost power and the ship heaved around parallel to the waves.
Okay.
And then all kinds of things happened. Everybody in the mess hall grabbed their table at one time, ripped the pipes out, and the ship was going this way. They had mashed potatoes and gravy, and men, and several people were hurt. But we had a rough time then, because no control of the ship. The waves were very close to 50 foot high. They had to cover the stack because water was coming in the stack. And then we had to tie ourselves into our beds because you couldn't hang on to the bed. They told us that the ship was designed, if it went over 30 degrees list, if it listed 31 or 32 degrees, it would capsize. And I was pretty sure we had gone more than that. And there were, but we'd hit the next wave and bat us back up like a matchbox. Hundreds of thousands of ton ship. And when we came out of the storm, the Navy said we had gone as far as 45 degrees, and the next wave pushed us back up.
I guess I would think that all waves go in the same direction. If you're already this way,
You roll off in
then I guess you swink in the swell or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
However, it worked. It kept you from capsizing.
Yeah.
Okay. At what point did you get power back?
Pardon?
Did you get power back during the storm, or not until afterward?
They had two guys working on the engines. They tied ropes around their belts and pulled them out into the middle of the ship and to hold them there.
Mm-hmm.
And they got power to go about 5 knots, which means it's going to take a long time to get across. And I anticipated then that we would head for Hawaiian Islands to get repaired, but the ship ship's captain was from San Francisco, and he wanted to be home for Christmas. So he thought they could keep working on the engines, and we ought to get there. So we took the northern route around up to Alaska and then back down. And when we got near the Alaska area, we had another problem. Ice on the ship. And first I didn't think anything of that, so what? And then I was an ambient patient, I could get around. So he said any ambient patient is required to come out. We've got a problem, we've got a lot of ice to chop. And got out there, the ice was over a foot thick, over the whole ship.
Mm-hmm.
It had landing boats,
Mm-hmm.
the 36-foot landing boats that they use for going into islands. There were, I'm going to say 30 of those anyway, tied on top of our ship,
Mm-hmm.
and they were all on half-inch cables, stuff, cabled down. When we came out of the storm, we didn't have any of them. They were all gone. We had a couple of dents in the top deck where they'd roll off the top
Mm-hmm.
of it, but they were all gone.
So when did you get back to this?
Pardon?
When did you get to San Francisco?
We got to San Francisco, as I recall, it was somewhere around the 10th of January.
So much for getting home for Christmas then. Right. Once you get to San Francisco, now what happens to you?
Well, we went to San Francisco and we were in, I've forgotten the name of the hospital, it's right at the base of,
Mhm.
of the bridge. But we were there a week and then got on a train. And it was cold, bitter cold. We got on this train and the train had clear sailing. All the other trains on that rail had sidetracked and let us through. So we never stopped. We were going through cities and went to Mayo General Hospital in Galesburg, Illinois. And I spent a couple of months there. When I was there probably 6 weeks.
Mhm.
I got a pass. I could go home. The only mode of transportation is your thumb. Couldn't get a ride. People just didn't have any respect for a GI.
Mm-hmm. Too long after the end of the war at this point?
So I got a weekend pass. I had to be back Monday morning, and then I talked them into letting me out early. I was supposed to leave Saturday morning. They said, well, if you want to leave at noon Friday, that's fine. So I left at noon Friday. Sunday morning, I was up to Benton Harbor.
Mm-hmm.
And thought, well, I'm surely not going to make it home. So I walked over to the other side of the road and started coming back. And I got back kind of late, but I finally did get a few rides. But most people really despised soldiers. They wouldn't pick you up. But that's all I had was my uniform, so.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, do you eventually, then once you have to bow it back to Galesburg and just wait, or what did you do? You just wait to be discharged, or?
Yeah, I had a lot of problems with my teeth, so I spent 4 days in the dentist chair. And I said, okay, now you're ready for discharge. And they put me on a train to Grand Rapids. I had a sister living in Grand Rapids, pretty close to the train station. So I hadn't even called her. And about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, I knocked on her door. I'd stayed with her when I went to high school. I went to Christian High.
All right, so that kind of gets you all the way back, and then from there you went back to your previous job. Was that the?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if I wanted to go back there, and I went to work in one of the garages in Allendale, overhauling engines again. But you had 90-day period to make up your mind if you wanted your old job. And when it got to 80, I said, well, it's going to take me too long. My objective was to have my own garage, but I could see the cost of things, and it's going to take too long to do that. So I think I would go back. So I went back. I was working assembling conveyor, and then there was an opening downstairs on the square shears. I don't know if you're familiar with what a square shear is. It's a big machine where you can put a piece of 10 gauge steel, 48 by 120, and cut it shear any width you want. Actually, it would take up to a 1/4 inch thick steel. Very, very noisy, because you had to have a lot of pressure on that steel so it wouldn't move as the blade was coming down. That was done hydraulically, and they were about 8 inches apart. Bam, bam, and that took this ear. Never even thought about earplugs or anything.
Yeah, that's the old days.
So I decided I was going to leave that. The home building was in high gear, and I was going to get a ready mix concrete. And so while I was waiting, they couldn't get anybody else to run that machine. Nobody would do it. So I got a call. I said, will you consider coming back and run that machine till we get it may take a week, maybe 2 weeks. Yeah, I can do that, because I didn't have my financing straightened out yet. So I was just biding time. And so I went back, and about 3 or 4 days into the first week, I had a cold. I thought I was getting the flu. So I was on the way to my doctor, Granville, and right where your college is now. I had to digress a bit. About 2 miles west of that, there's a young kid hitchhiking. So I picked him up. I decided that after the experience I had with hitchhiking, if I ever got a car, I would never leave a hitchhiker. And I didn't. I picked up some really bad apples. But this kid was well-dressed, young kid. And we're traveling down the road, and a about where the college is now. He said, I'll get out here. There's nothing there, just farmland. That's strange. But immediately after he said that, he shot me here with a 38 hollow point, and it took part of a rib out, and then went across through lung, stomach, small intestine, stopped in the colon. I went, grabbed his hand, and got the pistol away from him. And then he had a switchblade knife. He pulled a knife, and I heard that snap, and I said, well, I really gotta control this kid, or I'm gonna get all cut up. And so I kept the knife out of me, and he realized that he wasn't gonna win. So he got out of the car and ran. So I got out of the car. I had the pistol. Click, nothing. Firing spring had broken.
Mm-hmm.
Good thing it did, because I would have killed him.
Now, in the meantime, you've got a bullet wound and whatever.
Yeah.
Do you get back in the car and drive someplace?
No, I tried to get him, and then I started feeling weak, and I finally collapsed. And I was laying on the road, and there was a boxer, a guy who was a professional boxer and lived in Grand Rapids. He had a cottage in Grand Haven, and he was just coming through. He saw me laying on the road, so he stops, picked me up, put me in the back seat of his car, and took me to Butterworth Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And I never passed out. So they said, well, we got to take that bullet out. So they went down for x-rays, and I said, it's right here.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you where it is. This is where it hurts. They waited and waited and waited, and then finally they got a surgeon in. He looked at the x-rays, and he went to my folks. My folks were there by that time. They called him.
Mm-hmm.
And told him that he said, there's no object in doing anything. He said, there's no way you could possibly live. And I'm laying there listening to this. And pretty soon I'm on another gurney, and they're going for another. I said, where are we going now? And I said, we didn't find the bullet. It turned out it was on this side.
Mm-hmm.
Why it hurt here, I don't know.
Well, that's where the nerves were hit or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So this all happened. I think it was probably 5 o'clock when I got in the hospital. It's now 11 o'clock, and I still haven't passed out. And they said, we got to do something. He's still alive. And this surgeon said, I can't do it. He said, there's only one guy I know of that might do it. He was a World War I surgeon.
Mm-hmm.
And he was out of town, but they found out where he was. They explained to him what the situation was. And by midnight, he was there. He looked at all the x-rays and everything, and he said, I don't think he's going to live. But he said, I have to try because he's still alive. can't just leave them like that. I hear them saying this.
Yeah.
So I go to the operating room. They tied my hands, tied my head down, tied my legs down, and cut me from here to here with no anesthesia. They had to take everything out because there was holes in everything. And they worked on me for about 2.5 hours. And then he said, if he lives, we got to open him up again and finish it. But we couldn't finish it now because then he'd never survive. I didn't gain consciousness until 5 days later. I made the front page of the press every day.
So really, civilian life in Grand Rapids was more dangerous than World War II.
That's right.
So what happened to your plans to go take a different job? Did you stay with
Yeah,
the same place?
It took me a year to recover from this.
Yeah.
And periodically somebody from Rapid Standard, they later changed it to Rapid Standard, would come out and see how I was doing. And he said, you ready to come back? And I said, well, you know, there's really nothing I can do except my arms are okay. So I think I can use a drill press or something, you know? But I surely can't work on a square shear or anything that where I have to stand. I could only sit. And he said, well, come on back. He says, we'll figure out something. So I had no idea what it was, but just come on back and we'll figure out something. So I went back and he said, we got 4 buyers. Each one has specific areas that they're familiar with. And the one buyer who gets all the odds and ends is snowed under. So we're going to put you with him and see how you like that. I did that for a week. And I went back in and I said to him, you know, I'm not coming back. I said, I realize what you're doing. You're trying to keep me alive. You know, I'll find my way, so, but I'm not doing you any good, so I'm not coming back. And he said, this is one of the vice presidents said, we've got some other plans. We'd like to see you Monday morning. So I went back Monday morning, and they had a desk all set up. I'd been working that little table. They said, that's your desk. The fellow that you were helping has been promoted to a supervisor in the shop. And that area of purchasing is now yours. So I stayed. And the next thing I knew, I was being promoted, and I wound up the last 25 years that I was there, I ran the department.
All right. Now, they got to close out here a little bit. I got to think back to the time that you spent in the service. I mean, in the end, what do you think you took out of it or learned from it? The time you spent in the service, so how do you think that affected you?
I don't think it really did anything to me. They were, at the time that I was in, you know, I remember one night walking across. I had to walk a couple of miles up across the Volturno River in Italy, and it was raining like crazy and mud ankle deep and soaked to the skin, windy. Said, how come I'm still alive? I want out. But that passed.
Do you think you learned anything from the experience or anything that was useful to you later?
Yeah, I think I grew up. I learned how to keep my mouth shut.
Eventually?
And I was treated very well by Rapistan.
Mm-hmm.
So that brings us up to date.
Yes, it does. So it's an interesting and certainly an unusual story. So thank you very much for taking the time to share it today. And that